All right, here we are. Hello, guys. Guys is a term in the Midwest we use for everybody. Just please
Good to see you, Jeff.
Same here,
don't take
yeah.
that
Hi,
wrong. Good to see
Jeff.
you all.
And Sophia. And Jonathan, I
Sophia.
guess, as well.
So Sophia's joining us again from um, her home in New South Wales. Is that right?
Yep.
Yes, I remembered. It's a 17-hour difference because we did the time change.
Oh,
Yeah, we sprung ahead, as we so gleefully say here. Um, So we are picking up on part two of our look at the Gospel of Mary Magdalene. It is has been very inspiring. The first conversation lasted over 2 hours. We hope to keep it in a tighter time frame. Um, so I will be disciplined in not jumping ahead this time. And we ended with a conversation about the adulteration of nature, which I thought was an excellent interpretation of the gospel when she describes uh, what uh, what the Christ described to her as sin, which is like the the adultery of in a marriage relationship, which is a powerful image for that which we are doing to nature and adulterating her and our own human nature. And so, on that happy note, we're going to pick up with
thanks, Jeff.
Sophia.
Thank you. Yeah, so we did leave on this slide last time, so I thought we'd start on this one just to recap. Um, One of the interesting things about the Gnostic texts, and I know we had a little bit of a debate about Mary Magdalene, is understanding which way is up and which way is down. And we see that in today's world as well, that some things can be misassociated or misappropriated as being good when they're actually harmful. Um, and so the definition of sin is adding some. So adultery here isn't how we would think of adultery typically, which is being unfaithful. This is really about adding something to an essence that shouldn't be there, and that's why we've got the pictures of the tomatoes and the injection. So it's saying that, and this was what Google brought up when I typed in adulteration. It seems food is the realm where adulteration is recognized, but in the Gospel of Mary, it means in many other different realms, including ourselves. An interesting point here, and I didn't know if any of you knew this, that the meaning of Joseph, the name Joseph, so it means fruitfulness, and it means to add to something, but actually in a way that causes something to be fruitful. And so you can see that this is perhaps something that can be misappropriated or misassociated, that we're told that if we add product X to ourselves that we will become more fruitful, aka Joseph, but actually we're less fruitful, or perhaps we could be more GMO fruitful than natural fruitful. So I thought that was an interesting turn, which is that there's an adulteration that takes us away from fruitfulness, but there's actually something that we can add to ourselves that makes us fruitful. I didn't know if you'd sort of come across anything similar to that in your readings.
So there's a lawful addition, or legitimate addition, and there's an adulterous addition, and it presumably then illegitimate fruitfulness. And it's funny how things bleed into one another, because, as Jeff mentioned earlier, this is right into the question of what is good and what is not good. And on verse 27, chapter 5, I'm just looking, it says, the good came into your midst, to the essence of every nature, in order to restore it to its root.
And I wonder, just before that, he describes that the entry of matter on the scene, and the passion that arose like no other passion, that proceeded from proceeded from
Something contrary.
something contrary to nature. And I'm wondering what's meant by that. What's meant by the entry of matter.
The contrary of matter.
The entry of it, he describes it as coming on the scene and unleashing this passion.
Right.
And is this related to the adulteration?
I think I really do think that it is, Jeff. Like passion is a type of suffering, a type of desire, isn't it? And I think that there seems to be is this innate value in the cosmos that is calling for us to add to ourselves, but we have the choice of what to add.
It brings me to mind of Cain and Abel, whereas without passion, without desire, one's satisfied with what is, the more able nature, shepherdly, just tending the sheep. Whereas the Cain nature seeks something more, is wanting to change what is, and has this desire and urge for something else, and slays that nature. But it's deep as well, because the adultery reminds me of they brought, not in this gospel, but they brought a woman to Jesus, and they were ready to stone her, and they said, "What? Come on, then, we have to stone her, don't we?" And he's like, "Let he who is without sin cast the first stone," and no one was that. So the good is outside, in that sense, it's outside all of us. So, this is big questions here, because if the goods come into our midst to restore us to our root, and we're all not good because we have no right to cast that stone, what happens? Has the able nature disappeared? Can that be restored once we're all of a Cain nature and we're passionately desiring for this, that, and the other?
I think just one thing that I'm not sure I can answer your final question, Jonathan, but when you were mentioning before about how Cain wants to change what is, I think it's also important to realize that what is something that is a balance between order and chaos, or dynamic and static. So what is could potentially be still an adding to in a healthy, fruitful way. That's still a what is, whereas Cain is adding to something to create something more than what is healthy.
I'm wondering about this, because I'm wondering if, say, we have Abel on one side, order, Cain on the other side, chaos. Is the addition something that is neither of those two? something that we haven't quite realized yet.
Well, I'd say that
That's what I'm saying. Because can we go back to the way things were?
I'd say that Abel was more like the Logos, so which has that McGilchrist non-dualism of being dynamic, but also having order by virtue of being dynamic in the right ways. So it's not static. Well, there's elements of static and elements of dynamism, and I think we often in these days confuse that. We think that order is something that is static and stable is static, but actually the Logos is stable and orderful because it has the balance of the two. So I'd probably argue that Cain is actually more order, and Abel is the balance of the two, because he's using the technocracy, he's using the weapons, and his son's turbo cane and all that sort of stuff, or turbo cane. Create all of the cities and the weapons.
So how does matter fit into this? Because it seems to be that this adulterated edition arises out of this passion, a passion that we, Jonathan, I agree that we can't go back from. Like we have to grapple with that part of ourselves. But the matter provides a resistance. And when Zach and McGilchrist were talking about matter, I thought they beautifully described the importance of resistance, the importance of constraint, for gaining traction in the world, for knowledge, for fruitfully multiplying.
Yeah.
So I wonder what this what the relationship. Maybe I'm just describing it. Maybe it is that which we push off from to some extent, but it doesn't seem to fully capture what's being asked from us.
And I think it's important to recognise as well that McGilchrist's version of matter is not what's the version of matter that's in the Gospel of Mary necessarily. That there could be some overlap, remembering that matter and mater are kind of linked as well. So essentially what it is it creates a frame. The matter creates a frame. And I think McGilchrist quotes in the Matter of Things about the ocean and the cliff. Like the wave can only be created when the ocean hits the cliff. Something can only be materialized when it hits a frame. Otherwise, it's just a dark background sort of thing.
So the Christ is describing an evolutionary moment. Then it's an evolutionary principle in a sense, not in the dogmatic neo-Darwinian sense of it, but in the Steinerian picture of the evolution of consciousness. That somehow he's describing us, that we materialized to a degree that unleashed the passion, and that goodness came in to remind us of our, not remind us, but to restore our essence. And he uses the term essence. The essence of all nature is what he describes. It's going back to its root for goodness.
So William, I think it's William Blake, in his writings, and I haven't read many of them, but through Mark Vernon, I feel like I'm intimately connected to them. But essentially, we're all born with holes like passions, and it's up to us to choose what we're going to fill those holes with. So even Christ was born with passions, but we have to choose what we're going to fill them with. And my understanding is here with sin that we're filling them with the holes with the wrong thing.
When you were talking at the beginning there, Sophia, but listening to your conversation, it feels like I'm perhaps going away from the conversation here, but I feel somehow it's relevant. You were talking about up and down and up becoming down. It's like this inversion. And there's this idea of polarity. So in three-dimensional space, with up, down, left, right, backwards and forwards, these are sort of familiar ideas. There's nothing strange about them. But in when you're relating to spiritual ideas, they take on a different quality. And so, for example, I think left is Luciferic and right is Ahrimanic, but the up-down one is the spirit and matter, most definitely. And when we talk about the root of what we are as human beings, we might be tempted, and that's actually quite it was a non-intended pun, but we might be tempted to just like assume that it's like our creator is matter, but really it's not. The creative is the creative spirit, that which is above, that has created us, but we now experience ourselves as the root. And that root has to be restored, but it's being restored from above, or from the Christ impulse in the gospel here. But one of the things, I think I just wanted to add that dimension to it. It set my thoughts going in various directions there.
That's very clarifying.
Yeah, like I've sort of borrowed a lot from Steiner in that way, with the Lucifer, the Ahriman, the Christ consciousness, and then the polarities are agape, and I put gape underneath. So in the way that aletheia means without hiding, or without forgetting. I'm proposing that agape means without a chasm, or without a void, as in unity. And so gape is when you're splintered. So sort of more, that's the more kind of the satanic, the devilish. I know we're not really into dualism, but
your language there is really interesting, Sophia. This dividing up, because which is one of the things that we've stumbled across several times with the Philosophy of Freedom and in other Steiner's works. This dual capacity of thinking, this dual ability that thinking has. It is both that which splits up. It's like the intellectual part that divides the world into the concepts. But it's also the reason which reconstructs out of those concepts a whole. Yeah. So very, very interesting what you're picking up on that.
And the splitting up is the left brain, and the wholing is the right brain.
And then there's this. And then there's the center, right? There's the verticality. There's we're speaking of horizontal polarity. And then there's the verticality, and the verticality has its own polarity, but it also has its own unity with that polarity, as does the horizontal. So we've made a cross, right? Yeah. And so what does the word redeem mean? If the Christ is the Redeemer, to redeem, right? Is it as it sounds? I don't want to be ignorant with the language, because I know I've got two language cops on my flanks.
I'll keep quiet.
The fuzz, man. But to redeem reminds me of the word also repent, which is to uncover, right? It's to the
change your mind. Repent is rethink.
Isn't pentimento an artistic term? Jonathan, help me out here, buddy. Isn't pentimento a artistic term for layering?
I'm sorry, Jeff. It sounds like it could be. I'm not 100% sure.
I
with
believe
that.
I believe it is, but I'm suddenly lacking confidence about
Yeah.
language.
No, it sounds plausible, but that could also be thinking as
But I've
well. You
but
know,
I've
to
heard this
find.
termed. So whether the term is correct, perfectly correct or not, the idea that we are peeling back layers to
It
get
sounds
back to
like pigments,
the
certainly.
source.
Yeah.
So
Um,
redeem the etymology of that is to buy back. It is what you think it is. And what I would say
It's
there is,
interesting though. Sorry, just to nib in that deem also. When you deem something, is you kind of choose or decide a judgment upon what it is or worth.
yeah, that was the nature of that question, Jonathan. Is the word to deem
I think it's
something
a
and then
different
Exactly.
route
to
though.
reclaim it in a certain sense, which is not a strictly economic reading of the terminology.
So Sophia,
I'm with
when you
Sophia
say
on that one.
I think it's a different route, Jonathan. The deem is a different route. It's a different verb to think.
yes, but the sound is the same, and so it poetically there's a linkage.
Jonathan, I'm with you. I really think language is phonetical, and I thought that the when McGilchrist described the larynx uh, developing the ability to make sounds before there were speech centers, that people were musical instruments. Essentially,
Right.
we were the music of the spheres, and that language was there to add, to adulterate in a certain sense, to add to, and it can be used fruitfully the way Jonathan's using it, or I'm just kidding. But it's to me, it speaks to the music of language is probably belies some of the etymology that we describe to ourselves.
We could see buying back as also a deeming, whereby you're redeeming, you're giving back the value to your value to something rather than somebody else's value. So I think it's not exclusionary. Those meanings can both be true, and we can discover how they relate.
The way that I see GAPE working is it's very transactional. So you decide to cast something away of yourself to add something in. And the question is, do you cast something away that isn't serving you to add something in that is serving you, and hence you become fruitful? Or do you cast away something that actually you really needed, but somebody out there told you didn't need, and then you add something in that actually is going to scatter you, to shatter you? So the way that I see redemption is those bits that you threw away, like the soul that you didn't need. Like I saw a video of Yuval Harari saying that humans don't have souls anymore. And so he's reframed, but saying that no, the spiritual doesn't exist, souls don't exist. So just throw it away. If you had one, just leave it behind, because AI is going to teach you the way. He says, seriously, in this video I saw about technocracy. So I would say the redemption would be that, oh crap, I've thrown away all of this stuff. I want it back. I've made a mistake. I'm going down and I want to go back up again. So I would see it as that in the process, we think that we're going forward progress, and we're casting away the stuff that actually we really need to be human and be connected to divine.
Right.
Selling our souls, essentially.
So then you would start to serve your soul instead of saying it doesn't serve me, get rid of it.
Yeah, exactly.
And then she might forgive you and come back. You're well.
So So we're still on the first slide.
I know I'm trying to refrain from continuing, so I
But no, I
think we
think
should
all
go
of
ahead.
these themes are really, really important, and they are going to continue in this. I think.
Yeah.
That trope of framing, I think, is very, very important, because I think what we'll find is that a frame will come along and we'll think that it's one thing, and perhaps originally it was, but its nature has changed. So we think that it's going to be there to protect us or to save us or whatever, but actually, yeah, it's been its essence, the frame's essence has changed.
And is it stop me if I'm getting ahead, but isn't this what the Christ's message is in when they're talking about, yes, I am getting ahead, when we're talking about how the soul could see the Christ as existing between as a mind between spirit and soul,
Exactly.
between so
Yeah, it's very
Am I-
powerful. It's very powerful because if we think with that trope of a vessel or a frame, it really is that kind of wow moment. Because if things like, I was just reading Mark Vernon's Secrets of Christianity again for some of the pages, like page 116, I've read about 116 times because it's just that amazing. But really, he talks about aporia, and it's about creating a vessel where logos comes in, and depending on the level of consciousness you're at, there's different ways that we create that vessel. So if we're in collective participation, original participation, it will be different to withdrawal or collective participation.
And a similar image is used in the Holy Grail as well, isn't it? It's the cup which received Christ's blood, which becomes the Holy Grail. Yeah.
Yeah.
Oh, that looked like you were doing the uterus there.
Yeah. No, it's the. I've got a picture of it in a bit, but Mary, and she's creating the vessel, the frame, through which something comes through. And in the olden days, back in the Greek times, we had these things called virtues, and they were. I know it's hardly anyone remembers them.
What are you talking about?
What? Before we had like flags and identity and all that stuff, we used to have virtues, which were part of our character, and character was a vessel. And we built our character. It was a techne. It was a skill, a craft to build our character through which we could then receive the logos.
Yes. I mean, this is an epistemological fact of our time. This is what Steiner's epistemology is pointing to. And in the Riddles of Philosophy, when he's talking about that, essentially elucidating the evolution of consciousness, you see the growing need to actually create a provisional self that becomes the vessel. And I would suggest that's what's between soul and spirit, that becomes the vessel that then becomes that which is transparent. And in this essay that Johannes Kruijnbuhl, is that how you say it, Angus? No.
Yeah, that's right.
Okay, good. Kruijnbuhl. He describes it as when empiricism meets this inherent, innate goodness of what it is to be a human being. When empiricism meets that, it doesn't have it itself is driven by moral impulse. It doesn't have a way to talk to or understand this inherent, this anthroposophia, has no language for it, has no no way to describe it, so describes it as not existent, even though it itself is impelled by this moral passion, right? I mean, this is what we're talking about. I think this passion that arose, that's so powerful, is for us to transform, to be the transformers of goodness. And we have this what he calls negative spiritual activity that rises in between empiricism, as it tries to grapple with this undeniable and unstoppable force of excuse me, of moral impulse. And then Cryambule says that, well, then this negative spiritual activity is actually positive spiritual activity, because it is an outgrowth of that which is inherently human and inherently good.
Yeah.
So is the negative good now? Is sin
It's
good?
neither good nor bad. It's the agape. It's the hollowing out that is provisionally there. But if it's believed, like if it's believed as a model, or it's believed as a metaphysically real mechanical structure or God structure, and you don't find the goodness within, which is what the Christ says to Mary Magdalene. Basically, I'm indwelling. You find it in yourself. You find me there.
Yeah. I am
And
you. It is you. It's not
and you're
out there.
creating yourself, this provisional self. This negative spiritual activity is actually that which, when if seen morally, we judge it. And then we're getting into this fantastic conversation with the powers. So I don't want to get ahead there.
And if we think about it, we're instituting ourselves. But now what we've done is we've created technologies that institute on the outside. And we now mediate ourselves through those. So what was meta frame has now become mechanistic frame, but we sort of confuse them, and it's an idol now. False idol.
We're confusing institution of self with institutionalizing of self.
Yes, and that kind of links to one of the desire, which we'll talk about in a bit, which is where the soul realizes that he's actually clothing desire, and where it should be, well, it shouldn't really necessarily be the other way around, but we certainly find that with our institutions today, that they were originally designed to clothe us, but all of a sudden we seem to become the garments of skin for them. So it's a total inverse.
And desire becoming unclothed in a way, kind of wild and rampant.
Yeah, the sort of fetishization of that the good impulse, say. And I thought Zach Stein spoke beautifully about the way in which propaganda is utilized just in this way. First with the advertisement industry, but then with the sophistication of getting right into people's desire bodies and informing them, like literally informing.
Yeah. And this is one of those ironies, isn't it, of all of our institutions, essentially, that, like, for instance, the pharmaceutical industry gets its money by us being sick and needing its products. And the government gets its money by us being dependent on it and it protecting us. So all of these institutions, they can get away from themselves and say, we're not going to let you go. And I think Jordan Peterson talks about the toxic mother who won't let the son go. And it's like that with these institutions. They have that seed in them of abomination, desolation. That they're designed, like they're self-interest is for us always to be dependent on them. And yet they were designed originally to help us build our character such that we could set free and then care from without, right?
Yeah, and it's just misconceptions because, as you say, that they were born out of good intentions and for good reasons and for helpful reasons, but then somehow this misconception comes in, and it's a whole other conversation entirely. But if we look at the order of the cosmos, and the order of the earth is the economy of the earth, so it boils down to this economy and a misapprehension we have of actually how economy works. So these institutions, they're about, I need money, I need to keep going, and then and then we
That's right.
make us their victims.
That's right. Progress, growth, etc.
Eric Weinstein calls it ego, embedded growth obligation, and it's not a very few people, or let's say not merely a few people have described it as cancerous, right? And it's really interesting in verse 28 that we're looking at. This is why you become sick and die. This adulteration is why you become sick and die. It's you become spiritually corrupted, and that the healing is the spirit of understanding. The Christ gives full weight to an understanding mind. He who has the mind to understand it, let them hear it.
Exactly. That's it. And the thing is that the institutions that we have today, it's in there because if we have our own virtue, which is an institution, it's actually in competition with them as an institution. So it actually benefits them to help us forget our institution and our connection to wisdom and the Logos, and to scatter us so that we, in fear, connect to the institution.
And that is the end goal. You can see it because money's becoming very difficult, and we seem to be being brought to this state where now we become the commodity because we are what those megacorps will own and transact. And so I lost my thought there, but that's that death, because it's this kind of it's Thomas More presented the idea of a utopia where no one needs anything. You can just go and collect what you need from the store and you take it home. So everything's provided for by the wonderful state and the wonderful pharmaceutical complex and everything like that. But at the end, that was the report of the traveller Raphael of this place Utopia went to. At the end, Thomas More says, but the one thing missing in that was money, because it's and Rudolf Steiner points right to this as well, that money is intelligence realized, because without some kind of abstraction, so we're not dependent just on this, like, I need that, you need that. Do you know what I mean? Then we cannot bring ourselves, our own intelligence into the mix. And so, we're being headed to that kind of like supposedly utopian state, but it will be the death of us, the sickness and death. There will be no. We will forget who we are.
I like to exactly the same subjects, like dressed in philosophy of freedom language, but also like the spiritual exercises that Steiner talks about. Particularly in the chapter 10 we're in now, it's a person who's like only uses the world of percepts to derive her moral behavior is ultimately a slave to what is in and around him. And this is obviously a long way from his monistic vision of what a free person is. But when we're looking at these percepts, they are dead products. They have been created by thinking, but they are no longer connected to that living source. And what, if you look at his spiritual practices, what you're trying to do is you're trying to revivify, re-enliven thinking. But that actually goes through a process. It's become, first of all, it's sort of accurate observation of the world. So if we're sort of talking about Goethe and his process, accurate observation of the plant. But then comes the important part, which you were talking about earlier, Sophia, this void part. You've actually got to destroy those images so that you can reimagine. So destruction, it's like the Shiva of Oriental thinking. It's like the old has to be destroyed, whether it's in your thinking or whether it's in the institutions, because if they have disconnected themselves from that living source, which Jonathan was referring to, or all of us were referring to, it's like these initial healthy impulses that created these institutions. They've fallen off the tree. They're no longer connected to the living idea, which continues to grow. And therefore, the only thing that can be done with them is they have to be put into the void so that the original impulse can be reimagined.
And is the void necessarily like a burning fire, or and in some cases maybe it is, but it might just be that the void is kind of like the water that enables those percepts that are otherwise fixed and momentary to flow. So like Goethe's, like there's a plant now, there's a plant later, there's a plant later, and there's all these plants, and somehow they flowed all into one. So he had to get rid of each individual percept as kind of like separate things so that they could flow into one.
And this is the difference between concentration and meditation / contemplation, because meditation is concentration will be the focusing on the pictures, on the mental pictures, on the observations, but then that has the possibility, if we can then having imbibed ourselves with those impressions, we then let them go and try to just let the spirit living in that activity that created all that activity, that becomes something which can create something new, and that's contemplation. So there is no content. My current understanding, let's put it like this, my current understanding is in contemplation, you don't go in there with content in the normal sense. You create you prime yourself with certain, Steiner talks about priming yourself with a question, or it can in Goethe's, so like the observations, and then you let them go, and then they communicate something new to you, which will be in accord with sort of the essence. And if we're thinking about an institution, what was the initial reason for that institution? Not how it looks now, what would be the problems of transforming it, but we have to obliterate it so that something new can be given to us from the spiritual worlds.
Oh, this is really, really, really good stuff. So, in the beginning of this gospel, there's the idea that the dissolving of all, and then that's revisited by the individual soul who has seen it. And so that's coming in a slide coming, and I won't go there. But this idea of dissolving all, and how that's related to getting back to the root. So above and below, all dissolved. And I think of that when Angus was talking, I was thinking at every threshold there's this void, or and Kafka said in his diaries that his greatest regret is that he was standing at the void and he turned his back on it, just sort of sat there instead of doing crossing the valley of the shadow of the death, right? Crossing that Rubicon, repressing the psychophysiological activity and replacing it with a free activity, embodying that. And I also think of when Steiner describes the initiation process, he describes the first thing one comes to is imagination, which you could say is what Goethe did with the archetypal in plant and animal as well, and found there a flowing imagery of the universal plant. Say, but then he describes the second stage of initiation as inspiration, and that you have to stop the imagery and realize that it's even that itself is a bit of a passive step in this initiatory embodiment process, and that you dissolve the imagery, and then inspiration arises as if music, as if you're hearing, but it's pure information similar to that which you experience with music. And in a sense, that has to be quieted then, even though it's quiet. It's stiller than still and quieter than quiet. It still has to be quiet or stilled for intuition then to arise and incorporate both back in. And there's a threshold in between each stage of development. And you see it with children too, because they go forward and they pull, then they regress a little bit, and then they're even further along.
And that also, sorry, we was a long time on this slide, Sophia, but Jeff also said something really interesting there, because in the Bible, it's like multiple times, there's this idea of blessed that are those who do not have to see to believe. It's a strong point that comes across time and time again, that they're not convinced by the outer senses, or they're not convinced by images, like Jeff's talking about, not convinced by sounds, but so like they are convinced by the spirit itself, which is completely invisible, but which is the source of everything.
And faith is a Christian virtue, and it's something that we have to master, we have to practice in order to access those seeds of the divinity within us. Otherwise, our body is not fallow and the seeds will wither and die.
Yeah.
So we have to create that vessel within ourselves, faith vessel.
Yes. Yeah. And we have to be very clear about what we mean by faith, because it's not blind faith you're talking about, right? It's not a belief. What I was thinking of when Angus was talking about this, I lost it.
Blessed are.
It'll come back. Yeah. Blessed. Oh, the seeing. Yeah, I lost it.
I'll give it. So, for example, one of them is, because you have not seen me, you have believed. Blessed are those who have not seen and yet have believed.
Yes. Right. So the perception, what he establishes in Philosophy of Freedom epistemologically, is that there are percepts without sense organs for percepts. In other words, we can perceive the ego of another. So we have an organ for perception that is not has nothing to do with how that has nothing to do with the empirical, right? In the coarse sense of the external world and individual percepts. It has to do with being able to perceive with a faculty that is not tied to matter, right? I mean, this gospel gives us the pushing off point. So it's tied to that which arises in the framing and in the resistance. It's tied to somehow this thing that we would otherwise not perceive. Like with light, you can't perceive it unless it's reflected on something.
And I think that's why Yahweh allegedly ordered that idols and so forth were destroyed, because it's a technology and it ossifies faith. And so if we're looking at an idol, we're not looking within. So that's and so these framing technologies, they get out further and further and further till AI. But one of the first generations would be idols, right? So something you can see, but that's not where faith lies. It's within.
And we have to develop the ability to see through the idols, because they're not going away, right? They're symptoms of this impulse to become better, to become more, and there's no pulling back that impulse. So
that
I think
is so clever how they're
it is. Well, it mirrors this self-consciousness that we're talking about. It mirrors the provisional
very
self
closely.
And so we're looking in the mirror, and this is the Narcissus myth, right? So we're looking at the reflection. We don't know it's us. We become transfixed by it. We don't know that we created it out of an impulse that is at its root the good. And we're so self-flagellating about it to the degree that we feel powerless in the face of it. But this is why, this is why I think Owen Barfield wrote his masterpiece. I think Saving the Appearances, a study in idolatry, was in order to save the appearances, so that so that the language that they are, say, this technologies are sort of gestures. They have a meaning in and of themselves, but the medium is the message, not the. And so now we have McLuhan coming in and helping us understand that all of these things are outgrowths of something that is just naturally human. And until we come in touch with that, we won't understand the consequences of any of it, because it's all idolatry.
I would actually argue they each have a seed in them.
Yes.
That evolves regardless of the human. And
they need the human in its evolution.
And it's that whole paperclip theorem, which is essentially you create a machine and you tell it to create paperclips and it will turn the whole world into a paperclip. I just think that's the natural progression, isn't it? Right? I mean, you see it in institutions; they buy each other up. It's a gobble, 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 gobble. It's just a natural instinct of man-made technologies. That's what happens. Or maybe it's even more than that. Maybe it is like the toxic mother. That a technology is good until it's not good, and then we have to let it go, and we can't let it master us. The emissary can't master us.
But maybe then our task is to shepherd it. Like, if none of us are good and we're saying that's bad, and yet we can be redeemed, then maybe our task is to help that one day to redeem itself.
I often wonder why the ancients used to worship like these almost satanic gods, like Apollyon, for instance, and Baal. Like, we can get onto that later. And you've got to, and I know Steiner talks about it as well. Like with Araman, is you kind of need to worship them, because if you don't have your eyes on them, they're going to come round the back and take you over. Right? I mean, you guys are the experts on this, but from me listening to some of the Steiner lectures,
I think one of the reasons they're worshipped is because they're just like, they are spiritual powers that confer power on people. It really, I mean, we live in a materialistic world where this idea of spirit is we have real difficulty conceiving that there's these invisible beings out there that really have as like consequential actions on what happens in our everyday life, what happens at a country level, what happens at a world level. We've moved so far from beyond that. But the ancients, they still had a living contact to both the good ones and the bad ones, and the bad ones conferred their powers on these people. So really, it's not strange that they worshipped these beings, because they experienced directly how, if they served them, they got what they wanted.
But the idea
Yeah.
that Steiner specifically brings forth as relates to these two polarities, and we can call them beings, and if you experience them as beings, then good, and if you don't, it's a name at least. But our job is to redeem them, right? Is to and how that happens, that's probably the question that we're asking to some extent, right? Is that how do we stand in between these polarities that are indwelling, just as the Holy Spirit is indwelling? How to engage them in a way that keeps them effective, but never together. And this is the problem I have with McGilchrist's picture, because it's a vertical picture. It's we just need the, what did he say, that his second favorite part of the brain is the left brain, right? There's two hemispheres, and the second favorite is the left one. He's in a sort of Luciferic way wishing for the right hemisphere to be the answer to our quest, to the solution. But what we're really asking, if we're not careful, we might get what we wish for, which is a one-sidedness on the Luciferic side, and then that just opens the door for Ehrman to come straight in and absolutely control that aspect, which is, I guess, what we're talking about with AI, is that we want to have this Luciferic grasp on ourselves, and we want to live forever, and the kingdom of earth is the kingdom of heaven now, and we've got this. But then Ehrman comes in and it's like blithely like, yeah, that works for me, thanks, appreciate it, right? What stands between, what wields them, that's what we need.
So McGilchrist, in The Matter of Things, does evolve that, and it's in chapter 30, I think, or part 3 of, it's like 1,000-odd page book, but I do have a soft copy, if you want a copy. And there's a chapter called Coincidentia Oppositorium, and it's talking about how you need opposites together, because that's where the beauty kind of emerges from the two. But he talks about this Iroquois legend. It's Iroquois.
Yeah, Iroquois.
Sounds like North American or something, is it?
Yeah, yes, North American, indigenous peoples to North America.
Yeah, it's you kind of need to read it, but essentially there's two brothers. There's one and it's called He Who Grasped the Sky with Both Hands, and there's another brother called Flint, and Flint is essentially Araman, and the one that grasps the sky with both hands is that kind of non-dualistic consciousness that has a bit of, like, knows that you need static and balance and so forth. And anyway, he gets really sick of his brother Flint and chucks him out. And Flint does all these really bad things, like creates all these like monsters and so forth. And the two hands brother eventually realizes that he has to bring Flint back, and gives him a role to play, like, so he creates thorns and wasps and all this kind of thing, because he realizes that you kind of need that as well in the world. And he has to your point, Jeff, he has to keep him across a river. He can't connect with him skin to skin. He has to keep Flint slightly separate from himself, but always looking at him, always watching him. And I think if we look at like those technological frames or those appearances that we idolize and models and so forth, I think the message is there that keep them across the river and always keep your eye on them, but we do need them. But they are dangerous, and they will, if you don't watch them, they're going to create some really horrible things. But it's a really, really good story in this chapter. Yeah. So I think he evolves that whole right left brain thing.
Yes, I mean, I get I get that, and I haven't read the Matter with Things. I've read The Master and His Emissary, and I would say that, and I've brought this up in this space before, that the activity of the human heart is much more profoundly powerful as a perceptual cognitive device than the brain. And it's constantly informing the brain. And so then you have the verticality of the relationship. And we could go into embryology and how the heart incarnates through the stomos diem, or this sort of God's stomach, I guess, how it sort of it incarnates, but it's formed by the rhythmic fluidity of the blood before it even has a vessel, before there's even a physical vessel for it. So it has this inherent receptivity that is so powerfully ongoing and fluid. And the brain is so, even the right brain is still specifically particleizing thinking into static concepts. Now one is open to the static concept of the whole, right? But the heart is actually perceiving the whole, right, and informing the brain. I won't go into that, but what I really want to say is that the verticality has to do with the life processes of the human being in each of us, and that the Christ lives there. That this is not a social construct. It's not a religious construct. It's a phenomenological reality, and that the heart is maybe perhaps the seat of the soul that allows for the way in which we are incarnating deeper and deeper into our body, but also independent of being encased or entombed in it.
I was really looking at the question at the top of your slide there, Sophia, when thinking about this question of what is good in relation to the picture that Iroquois that you were giving as well, and the story in the Bible, the Garden of Eden specifically. We don't know good until we manifest it. It needs the matter. It needs the matter before it can become perceptible.
Yeah.
And then we're actually able to form judgment about whether it is good or bad. But when it lives invisibly or unmanifest or immaterially, we can't know.
So and this is why I've put the chakras in there as well, Angus. I'm not sure when we say visibly, like in spiritually, I think is still something that we can perceive. And we have things like conscience, for instance, that will tell us if something is out of kilter. And really,
even conscience is an interesting one, isn't it? Because that's something that develops as well. I mean, the conscience of an 18th century. My name Hawkins is this like one of the most rapacious like slave traders was a guy called Hawkins. I don't think I'm related, but back in the day, I mean, few people would have blinked an eye about being a slave trader. So what does that tell us? It tells us that even this idea of conscience, this voice of conscience, is not static. It is something. Something is manifesting into the world. We think it's good, and then we realize, oh, there's a bit of good, there's a bit of bad. Okay, let's try and improve the model, type of thing. But we need it to be externalized. We need it to it needs to live outside of us so that it can come to consciousness in us. Because if it just lives in us, it's this idea of it's like why this whole thing that we often get hung up on in the philosophy of freedom. You can't observe thinking as it's being done. It's a living process. It needs to land somewhere before it can be considered in consciousness, and consciousness, matter is a more permanent form of consciousness. It could be one way you could describe it.
Yeah, I think. Sorry, Jeff. Go.
I just want to say that that those 2 points of view are both right. I think and I what's trivial to say right and wrong, but I'm inspired by both those ideas of the externalizing. But again, it says in the Bible that the blessed don't have to visualize things. You know what I mean? That sort of thing. But I think also now we're talking about Christ. This is kind of a license to with the philosophy of freedom, we're constrained with the epistemology and the phenomenology of the soul, and we're touching upon a real ground. Speaking of a real ground for this phenomenology to be real, this spiritual phenomenology to be real, not just a belief or a blind faith. But I think of the body of Christ, and isn't the goal, in a sense, to not see ourselves or to see the world manifesting the spiritual reality, but to see ourselves from the point of view of the world. And the body of Christ is the human social organism, is it not? And so I would be served to see myself from your point of view, and vice versa. I would think. And this sort of, what's that German word? Again, the Umstolpen.
Yeah.
The englovature. The sort of where we become.
Turning inside out
and outside in at the same time, simultaneously. Yeah.
I think it's also worth mentioning, like Barfield here, and he spoke about how consciousness evolves. I think it's sort of a three-phased evolution. So from original participation through to withdrawal, then to reciprocal participation. Yeah, and Jeff, I'm really seeing that sort of that reciprocal kind of participation in what you're talking about, and you can almost imagine like an original participation, which was like the time of Moses and so forth. It was totally fine to raise a city to the ground, rape and pillage and kill 1,000 people, and there was no morality there because we were all just part of morals were a miasma, I think Vernon describes it as.
Rudolf Steiner describes that really interestingly as the cultures would grow old, and then a young culture would come in and decimate it and take over, and it just seemed natural because the old have to go. Amazing. Yeah.
That's right. So that was collective, and then it moves around. I would actually argue today we're back in collective.
Strong element of it, very much so.
Very much so. Collective. So it's really about, I will sacrifice myself for the good of the state, would be a real collective participation type conscience.
Yeah, or for the pharmaceutical companies, I will sacrifice
Yeah,
myself.
yeah. Well, the state will tell me what is good, and I will do it. So yeah, that's collective participation. Yeah.
Anthony Fauci.
Yeah. So then, and so Barfield says it goes round in a cycle. So the next reiteration of this will be withdrawal, where we individualize again. And we start to realize that there's something within. So that's coming. But just on that point, Jeff, you're right that we are all right. It's just that there's an evolution of conscience dependent on the evolution of consciousness, I would argue.
Yeah, well, and he says it here. So, what is the word conscience mean? For example, does it have knowing in it? Seems to have knowing in
together,
it.
knowing together, yeah.
Oh, yeah. Well, that's interesting, isn't it? Because then it's not an individual voice in your head; it's a communal perception. Say, oh, maybe a Christ consciousness.
And I would say that whichever consciousness evolution that you're at, imagine all those little lights, all your chakras. They'd all be, if they're aligned, you can feel it.
Yeah, the embodiment. It's the embodiment.
You can feel it,
of the spirit of understanding and becoming embodied.
And that changes. It's dynamic. It's not, the first level there might be more yellow and blue or whatever, but and it evolves according to the consciousness, I would argue. Yeah,
just so you know, you may know this, but Steiner gives a very detailed description of the chakras in his How to Know Higher Worlds.
Higher worlds.
Yeah. Higher worlds and its attainment. It's referred to in different ways, but and the proper order for getting those suckers spinning.
And it's often the inverse as to. You're very important there. What you're saying, Jeff. The opposite streams of the rising Kundalini, as opposed to through the
alignment. So there's that consilience there, and that's why it's so important that we need to know in a together way. And today in our society, we know through experts.
Well, and the shadow of that is public opinion. So, we all know this, right? You're going to do this, right?
Which is mimetic.
That's the shadow side of the. It's mimetic and mimetic. It's the shadow side of this communal.
That's right. It looks the same.
Perceiving.
It feels the same, but it's not the same.
It's that kind of lazy and impatient thing whereby now I know this is right, and you all know it, don't you? Right, so you have to follow me, and everyone's so I can't be bothered to explain it to you because that's going to take 3 or 4 generations.
And I'm going to take advantage of your moral impulse. This is the being that is lording the public opinion, right? Whichever being that is, I would suggest that's it. That's the Aramaic being, is this sort of intimation of Christ, right? That it's groupthink. It's that which blithely wishes to just continue on hardening and making permanent that which is meant to be dissolved.
I would like to bring this round to a positive angle on exactly the same point you're talking about, because one of the things that's really heartening since the psychosis of the last couple of years is it's a lot easier to identify who's actually capable of critical thinking. I think we recognize each other a lot earlier. It's obviously there are no guarantees, but if I ask a couple of searching questions about key thoughts on certain events of the last couple of years, I've already got a fairly good idea of where you are in your critical thinking. But it's not so much the separating myself off from the others, which might become an issue. It's actually being able to identify who's playing on the same team here. This recognition, we feel ourselves differently from other people in society. We feel a strong aversion to the messaging and all the things that you were talking about previously there. Yet when we get together, we feel this. We experience this community, even though we're radically different in our own different thoughts and areas of interest and that type of thing. We feel, there's a level of comfort here. I can talk freely. The people that I'm talking with do seem to be able to think critically about these things. I don't have to go and explain these things, and that makes further conversation a lot easier. And that is thanks to the dark forces becoming so obvious with their powers. So I can see why there's a lot of why the events of the past couple of years can be seen extremely negatively, but they're also revealing the real darkness that is behind them. And for those that are looking for the light, it's a godsend.
It was inevitable in a sense that we would come to this point. Did it have to be this bad? I'm not quite sure about that, because human freedom plays a role here. But it's inevitable, and I blame Kant for it. Not really. That poor soul was. He's got to be tortured right now, because he's like, "This is not what I meant."
No, this is it. It's the seed.
Oh my
though,
God!
Jeff.
What did I unleash? But it was the inevitability of empiricism. Empiricism is what Angus was saying earlier, which is to be transfixed by objective nature, that everything is an object and everything is objectifiable, except us. I mean, we're just subjects and we don't really exist, as Yuval says.
Each of these creators, when they created something, it came with a caveat and a covenant caveat. And it was like, I believe in God, but this is a really good way of looking at the stars. Only use it to look at the stars. Don't use it for anything else, And like when Max Weber talked about bureaucracy, he said it's really good for organizing resources, but don't use it for this. Well, here is an instruction manual. Don't use it for anything else. And then when Adam Smith talked about the economy and capitalism, he's like, banks are really good, but don't let them get away with this. And you've got to have virtue, right? Which is why he wrote 2 books, Wealth of Nations, and then the other one that I've got but I haven't read. So there was always a caveat covenant with these things. But guess what? Whoop! Off it went. I'm sure that Kant, when he did what he did, there was he probably never imagined that God would totally have gone, and not only that, but would be defiled in these abominable ways. He just assumed that those foundations would always be there, and they're not anymore.
This reminds me a little bit of Douglas Murray's War on the West, and what he really is describing, that the West is at war with itself. And it's because of this, you hear some philosophy of science people describing the way in which rationalism and empiricism kind of duke it out, and which one is the better one than the other one, but they're the same. Like if you're only empirical, you only have ratio as a cognitive device. You could only parse things out cognitively, and so rationalism is always going to rationalize why it's making this thing that it has no understanding of the consequences, but I have an inkling of the consequences, so don't use it this way. Like nuclear energy, it's great, it's clean. What can be done with it? Blow up stuff. You have a gun in your hand, you're going to shoot it. There's a gun lying on the table, that gun's going to get shot, right? Are guns inherently bad? No, of course not. But uh, uh, there's still a technology that will be used for both.
That's right. That's right. We've got smart cities coming into my town here, and everyone's like, "It's great! Like we can cycle everywhere and all this," and they have no idea. And they're like, "Well, this doesn't say in the council plans that we get fined if we leave our 15-minute." And it's like, no, it doesn't have to. As long as it's there, then the rest can be built on top of that. Stealth.
We seem quite far away from Mary Magdalene.
Indeed.
Yeah. True.
The next, but I mean, it's all been pertinent. The next verse is, "He who has a mind to understand, let him understand."
Oh, sorry. The next verse. Which one was that, Jonathan?
29. So you missed that one out.
Oh, I did too.
That's all right. We've been talking about it.
John's
That's
goes
the
on
only thing we
board.
were saying.
And I think as well, understand is interstand. So the root of understand is actually inter.
Oh, I like
deliberately changed again.
Is that
So the
from
under is
Greek?
like, oh, what does my king say? Well, I understand. But no, actually it means it's interstand. So interstand means stepping outside where the virtue is, where the gods and the goddesses, the diamonds are.
It suggests me also like stepping into the other person's shoes.
And stepping into this conversation.
Yes,
We've created a third thing,
right.
and we are stepping into that, yeah.
I like that.
I love this because you have, again, going to the epistemology of Steiner, he fairly well establishes thinking as a universal activity. So that means that's not local to me, it's not local to you, it's not even local to human beings, that it's somehow a part of the ground of being. And to get back to your root is to incorporate the healer, which is to make whole, which is to I guess interstand, as you were saying. And so we have the answer with our own intuitionalizing of that universality, our own individualizing of that universality.
Yeah, that's right.
Powerful.
And we've forgotten who we are, so we don't have spirit anymore. And so we've been presented with 2 or 3 acceptable realms, and so we interstand with those. But we're actually not interstanding properly, are we? We're not standing in the middle of everything.
Right. And we're also mimetic beings. I mean, we conform to reality. And if the reality is a simulated one, as we've intimated before here, then we'll conform to that. If we truncate that reality, but that means that to truncate thinking into the intellect, which is it's not appropriate at all. That's not even thinking. That's just making associations with already conceived material. It's like puzzle piecing rather than thinking.
We've got to think of it as well about the culture today, which is about shattering identity, shattering personality, shattering character, and how similar that feels to interstanding, where you're standing amongst many different entities. And you can kind of see how people think it's the same as trying to achieve godliness by being many different things. you know, I'm a them now and I'm a cat now, or whatever it is.
Which is why the ideologies become religion. They have all the markings of exoteric religion, right?
Right, and we
Including
have this
scientism.
in our DNA. We have, I believe, we have markers that say, actually, yeah, this process feels like godliness. You know, it's got all the markings of it. You know, I've dissolved myself, and I've sacrificed myself, and you know, for the greater good or whatever it is. But it's hijacking a mechanism.
I can't wait till we get into the powers, because this is exactly the conversation that's going on between the soul and the powers.
Maybe we can just flick through some of this, but so we talked before about matter gives birth to a passion that has no equal. Some of the commentators on this say that it's a nefarious desire. Others say that it's a natural, like it's basically we're born with a gap because we are meant to move forward and seek that which we need to become fruitful. So really the interpretations vary on verse 30.
Can I ask you a question on the words? What's the difference between matter and nature?
So nature is the way. Oh,
Isn't it okay, I'm gonna hazard a guess here before Sophia gives the right answer. Nature is the formative forces that work within matter. So the matter is that which nature can manifest through.
So matter's the frame, yeah? We've been saying.
Yes.
And so what's nature in relation to that? You're saying it's the formative, something that's some of the spirit that's coming towards that frame. Is that what you're saying, Angus?
Yeah, I think the way Sophia's been using matter and mater is really good. I think it's like describes exactly the relation, or one of the ways that we can describe this relationship between concept, living idea, spirit that is non-manifest. Well, nature is all the forces that live in a plant seed. They are completely invisible to us, but they gradually unfurl themselves through their activity. They manifest like through a period of time. So the nature, but then we go and do like the human thing, which is says like nature is that which is the manifested thing instead of that which has created what we see.
So I have a further question on that then. Before Sophia answers it correctly.
Gives us the right answer.
Gives us the right answer. Just before
this,
no
such thing is correct, Jeff.
Just to there's true, good, and beautiful, however, and I expect that you'll be espousing those. But just before this, right? I mean, literally just before this account, the Christ came out of matter after existing for 3 days within matter. What the hell is that, right? So matter was necessary for the resurrection.
In the sense that Christ is the prototype, to use simplistic language, showing us the way in which, because prior to that, mankind was doomed to the Luciferic Aramanic temptation. We didn't have the resources, the spiritual resources within us to do that. And the spiritual world from which Christ came from didn't even know the full extent of the human experience. It had to live through that suffering. It had to live through the experience of being cut off completely from the spiritual world, that spiritual darkness, and then develop the powers within itself to escape from that
I think
that entrapment.
I think that's what we're going through, actually. Like I don't think it's just a prototype. I think we're ensconced in it. We're almost in tune.
The reason I didn't like the word is because it sounded very materialistic, but it really is this idea. Somebody's got to lead the way, because otherwise we don't know where we're going.
One of the things that Steiner brings up pretty regularly in largely in the philosophy side of his work is that the problem with materialism isn't materialists isn't that there's such a thing as materialism. It's that materialists don't understand matter at all. They have no relationship with matter that could explain it scientifically speaking, and that the only way to be able to understand what matter is to indwell in it, is to live in it, is to experience it. And that's what we're experiencing. That's why I think we're doing everything we can to not have to do this terrible. I mean, one of the things when I was a kid, there was this movie called Buried Alive. Oh God, I couldn't stand watching that movie, but I couldn't stop watching it either because it was this terrible thing of being entombed or encased in underground, and but this is what leads to this gospel, this 3 days.
Yeah. I felt like that in my previous employer. Like you'd rather, commit Harry Carey than stay another day, sort of thing. Because you do feel entombed, especially when you're sort of like in 1984 type thing, where everything's a surveillance and all the rest of it. It's just, and 2 + 2 = 5. It literally was like that. I think one of the things that I really get out of this as well is that concept of an avatar. And I just looked up avatar and etymology.com, etymology or whatever. And it says the descent of a Hindu deity to earth in an incarnate or tangible form. So that's what avatar means. And I see that the image of self is an avatar in spirit, and then our physical body is an avatar in earth, on the earth. Yeah, so there's many frames. Like a babushka doll. the frames for logos, essentially, to come through. So yeah, was it you, Angus, that was saying that we need to experience the material, that the real earthly existence. That's how we do it.
And when through a spiritual scientific understanding of what the Christ impulse is, rather than old sclerotic versions that like hang around in churches, we actually can begin to really sense the living force working in there, how it fills us with life, how it actually allows us to go back to these old sclerotic texts and actually find real life in them. Other people, the priests, they've managed to kill these texts so that they just leave you dumbfounded there. So like thinking, well, how's this supposed to help me? Because it's just a word salad. Whereas spiritual science,
yeah. In fact, this one was buried alive, right?
So
this text was buried alive by the church fathers.
Yeah. And yes. And this is part of the incarnation, it's like the earthing process. But I'm trying to recover my train of thought. That yeah, I think some people, not people I know directly, but it's like secondhand, some people are still able to get a lot of solace from. It's like just a traditional reading of the Bible. They can reach it with their feeling life, and in that sense, it has a lot of value for them. But for a mind that has learned to think critically, it's very, unless you have spiritual science, or and perhaps there might be other parts out there that I'm not aware of, then it's very difficult to approach this type of a text and feel the living, the life that lives within it. That we're somehow being reconnected to what obviously inspired these people. It's like 2,000 years ago to create a church. An image I come back to every now and again is this idea of the Christians in the Colosseum. So like, yeah, well, if we've got to die type of thing, because we believe strongly enough in, we've experienced something real in us that means that, yeah, well, we're not going to renounce what is an essential part of our being just because some Caesar says you're not allowed to have this religion here. And that type of testimony, in the sense that these are people taking actions, they are doing things based on an inner moral conviction, speaks to the strength of what was living inside them. And that's what Steiner has managed to reignite in me, and I believe many other people, with this enhanced understanding of how I can go about reading not just the Bible. I mean, this can be any spiritual literature where I feel myself reconnecting with the spirit that created it, and obviously in the Bible, then that becomes the Logos.
Definitely. And I don't know if you find as well, Angus, that like you'll come across epiphanies all the time, and then you go back to the text with that particular question, that framing, and it reveals other things, and you just go deeper and deeper and deeper into the text.
And so something that was like a no for me when I was young, I'd never read a book a second time. Now it's like, here are these books. So I mean, if I had to go to a desert island, one book would be enough. This is not saying what I want to do, but there's an ability to go deep into something that was never there before. Something that's being cultivated, something that's grown in me, because this idea of this picture from the Bible of the bread of life, it's not an exaggeration. It's an inner experience. I've come in contact with something that really does satiate, and it can always be there.
I put the circumpunct in this slide because I came across it. I meet with a pastor or a retired pastor every week, and we've been talking about Mary as well. And he was like, "Oh, Sophia, the circumpunct." So I thought I'd put that in. I don't know if you've seen this before. So it's this circle with the black dot in the middle.
But I was reading about a particular exercise by Scala. It's like we're related to this circle. So I'm interested. I'll perhaps if you could tell me how it's related, and I can tell you if it's the same thing that I've been reading about, or whether I'll tell you what he's saying about it.
So look, it's been bastardized by like the Masons. But essentially it represents consciousness, and the dot in the middle is divinity. And it's really about us trying to go within ourselves to find divinity. So the circumference is essentially our material skin, and then we venture inside. to find the divinity. And it's only when we've found that divinity can we then look outside. So we're sort of the son of man is within us, so to speak, because we found him.
And building on it, yeah, it's the same idea, and building on that further. Actually, if it was a true, if the definition of a circle is like an equidistant, a point, it's like all points which are equidistant to a certain point. But as soon as that point in the center has a dimension, it begins to exist in space. It will never actually give, it's like a true circle. So actually, in a true imagination of that, let's say a more accurate imagination, that point is a counterpoint in space, i.e. it doesn't exist, and it's non-existence that allows the circle to come into being.
Can you say why the point, if it was a real point, like, you know, with your pencil or something, it would not give a true circle?
Because as soon as it has dimensions, if it, let's say the dot is this big, then you have to trace the round. You move round the circle, or you're not the whole circle. And so you're not you're only part of the dot, and then that doesn't give a true circle around a central
Right.
point.
Because if the dot has a dimension,
Exactly.
Yeah, I understand. Yeah. Okay.
Exactly. That Scully duo, I think it was meditation number 9.
That's a coincidence.
Number 9. Number 9. Number 9. Paul is dead.
And my pastor was saying that essentially that we've now just become the circumference of the circle. And I actually then postulated that the dot is outside the circle. And what was unity is the dot in the middle of the circle is unity. A dot on the outside of the circle is one tiny fraction of multiplicity. So it's a thorn on the bush, so to speak. It's the tiniest little pinprick of a bush. But what we now do is we idolize that pinprick on the outside. So, like, for instance, in economics or in the financial markets, we deify financial stability. And that is the tiniest little thorn on the bush, but we've made it everything, and it's our pinnacle of our cross. But it's actually, it's not. Because it's like we only worship one thing, it gives the illusion of unity.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. It's because it's dimensional in space. It's perceptual, and it's perceptual without the spiritual activity underlying it that brings it together. I also think of the sun is a mass of incandescent gas, a solar energy furnace, right? But what is the sun, right? And you get very esoteric descriptions of what the sun is at the center, right? Is that it's actually negative space.
Mm.
It's not dimensional. It's but we reify it dimensionality, a certain, but flattened dimensionality, not conciliant dimensionality.
It's funny as well that, like, we look at the sun and we say, "There's the sun," and then I read a book and the guy said that, but think about it, the sun is wherever its light is, so it's right here. We're in the sun right now. So that's kind of like the other side of it.
I have a question that may or may not be related, and that is why the term "Son of Man" is referred to as this in relationship to the Christ, the Son of Man, not the Son of God, but the Son of Man.
Does anybody else want to go for it? Otherwise, I'll go for it.
I would just say it's, a seed that is within us that is growing.
Yeah, and just building exactly on what Jonathan is saying is that it's this idea of that incarnating, leading a life in matter is part of our individuation process, the recognition that we are spiritual beings, but we couldn't do it if we didn't actually live in a body. We need that resistance. We need that separation so that we can begin to wake up those forces. Were you thinking of something different, Jeff, there, or?
Probably along those lines. I mean, the fact that the Christ experience is about self-determining through freedom suggests that the the Son of Man becomes as much as we are. I'll reserve what I'm going to say.
I'll add something else there then. One of the things, like we were talking about how we can reread things, and we can, like, one sentence can provide food for thought for a long time. This particular one about Father and Son, or Creator and created, but on how many dimensions that can actually be understood. That so we've all got kids, haven't we? And what's it like when it doesn't have to be a son, it could be a daughter as well. But when they leave the nest, they are an individual being. They begin to lead their own lives. They are to a certain extent a product of the home that they came from, but they have their own individual processes, and they will go out and lead life and becomes like ever more independent beings. And so whilst people might talk about it as infantilizing the relationship between man and God, in a way it's so obvious that is exactly what it is. It's like we were born into this world thanks to our mothers and fathers, and they gave us a certain start on life, and then we go and carry on the process independent of them to varying degrees. So a phrase like Son of Man, which seems somehow so evocative and so mysterious, when you actually begin to think, okay, my son is a son of me, he's a son of man. Okay, what's his relationship to me? What's his relationship to what life? Well, God, that's really actually very similar to the description that's being given in the Bible as well.
Yeah, I take it that way too, that it's literally a son of a man, in that sense, son of man, so just human. And then in relation to Son of God, I tend to think of it in that terms of that polarity. So if there's God at one end and man at the other, in some way also they are a unity. They're not a separate thing, though it's necessary to distinguish them, and so they do have different characteristics. There's a unity there, like that we were discussing earlier, the spirit and matter thing. They're not actually any separate thing, but they are distinct.
So there is, as I understand it, I don't know what it is, and I've never even investigated it, but I've heard not just a few people talk about the relationship of the Son and the Son. So we carry the Son around in us, say, and we're part of that as a sort as relates to it being the negative space. We're carrying that negative space around in us. And I think that relates to the matter with things, as you were alluding to there, Angus, and I think that's also what McGilchrist is on about to some extent. But anyway, I'm interested in the two words and their phonetic sameness, but if
I
there's
think the capitals. I'm not that I could read the original Coptic text, but the capital seems to be alluding to a divinity. And I really like Jonathan's take on it, which is that it's got some sort of unity to it. It's like a collective Son of Man, like all the different multiplicities are all together in one Son of Man, which I kind of really like that interpretation. And there's Jonathan's favourite verse 38.
Yeah.
I know it's your favourite because you put it on Facebook.
Yeah, I'm feeling it a bit of a battle with the legal system and laws, and then what's actually lawful.
It's been hijacked, hasn't it? With all of them, it's a legal, industrial, political complex.
Well, it goes back to what you were saying about if you create something, and but don't do this with it, right? Right? Don't let the bureaucracy run away with it. Don't let the lawyers run away with it, or don't let the corporate structure dominate it. But it's there to be wielded in that way, and so we're a very, very litigious group.
And it's related to chapter 9 of Philosophy of Freedom, isn't it? This contradiction that we've got there. Not the contradiction, but the problem of how do you get from a society of selfish egoists to it's like ethical individualists who they are working from the same fundamental healthy spiritual principles, which will assure a functioning, loving, good society where you do not need laws because you've internalized completely that I am my own authority, and Jonathan's his own authority. Sophia and Jeffrey, they're just their own authorities, but because we drink from the same spirit, we know that we're working together.
We have a working example, which is whenever we drive on the road. Do you know what I mean? We've all imbibed that same code. Occasionally, obviously, there's accidents, and occasionally people break it, but otherwise it works. Yeah.
A really interesting point here as well is that when the law was first developed many thousand years ago, they had divinities that represented certain components or aspects, facets of law. So prudentia is one that's embodied in our economical system, but in the law of the economical system. Fairness, justice, prudence, wisdom, all of these types of goddesses and gods were there, and the law interstood between them, and they were the guardians of that. And a lot of words that we use today, like the chair of the board, the board, the chair, what those are saying, I tried to look into them, but it was really my intuition, but then it turns out that it kind of is fact. Is that what it's doing is it's reminding the people who are holding sway in a company or whatever that they are just the seat that a divinity is sat on.
Right, that's good.
Yeah, and the board is just the table. Like the table.
But that was appropriate when we were completely held by divinity, and we needed that. And the
We
point
were
coming through
God-fearing.
here is that those times are changed, and it
The
is now the
circumpunct is
lawgiver's
gone.
in us.
I keep thinking that the answer is in the economy, because that's where brotherly and sisterliness actually occur, right? We're convinced by the worldview that's predominant that it almost fetishizes the economy into evil yet necessary somehow,
Yeah,
and and yet it's the way in which we socially interact with our wills. So it's the way in which we engender things and bring them into being, and it is the body humanity that is at once antisocial, but also at the same time um, um, eh, um, irrepressibly social.
Yeah. There was a podcast that was it Schmachtenberger did with somebody who was maybe a historian. I can't really remember now, but he was talking about souks, marketplaces in these ancient towns, and it was just so powerful, like how he was explaining the souk was the center of everything, and that and there was the temple there, and there was a mistress at the outside of the souk who was like, you can't come in unless you've cleansed yourself. And then there was a prostitute bar, and there was all these different things, but basically it was like the hub of the city.
Yes, that's Bard. He was talking to Bard. What's
Yeah,
his
it
name?
was so powerful.
What's his first name? I forget. He's associated with that Parallax podcast with Andrew Sweeney and um, anyway, that he talks about bazaars
Yeah,
he's sort of asking for local economies as bazaars where you have gatekeepers and quality checkers, and you're if you're bringing junk in or you're trying to swindle people, it'll quickly go around the bazaar and you'll be pushed out to the margins. Yeah.
that's right. And that's how, like with the Greeks, that's how ideas are shared, and
in the fora.
new philosophies or new consciousness are formed and all that kind of thing. It's through the trade, isn't it? The trade is almost the vessel, and I'm sure that there's a god of trade somewhere. Probably Mercury.
The powers that be know this. I would suggest the powers that be know this, because I'll give you a tiny example. In our Waldorf school here, we had the pandemic, right, and everybody's isolated, and they completely changed the way they did things, so that the pickup and drop off didn't have you walking through the campus, right, and so you weren't a bunch of parents walking through the campus having uh, impromptu improvised conversations that weren't planned, right? So you had this the bazaar was taken away, and we're just left with people in their cars looking at each other, dropping off with their masks on, right? And this is a powerful reality that is forming before us, that has to do with the body of Christ that lives in the communal, that lives as the Son of Man in each one of us,
Yeah,
as the body of Christ, and all we have to do is be with each other,
yes.
but in a new way, because now we are waking up to this
Yes.
power of perception. It makes me think also of the Christ's miracles, and what Steiner describes, that it wasn't that he turned water into wine. It's that he allowed for the perception of the way water is turned into wine through the living process of the grape growing on the vine, and that so people were like able to be co-creators in that process, because they perceived things, um, intuitively perceive things in simultaneity as a body.
That's fantastic as well, because what you're saying is it wasn't like magic show and being I just changed the rules of nature. It's this is what really is, and I'm going to take you into the details of it, and you can embody it and live it.
Yes, yes, yes,
Yeah.
yes.
And
also,
but what the money changers want to do, they know, like you're saying with the economy. Just sorry, Sophia, just quick.
no,
They
sorry.
know all this process, but they're money changers because they don't want us to like just do it freely. You know, we got the mechanisms, we can all do it together. They want to make money out of that process. You know, the money changers, they're interested in their transactions because they want to get something out of it, so control it. That's why we want to throw them out, you know, because we don't need that. We want to control our own bazaars, our own marketplaces.
If we take that avatar metaphor further, so we've got the avatar, which is our soul in spirit, and then our body on the earth plane. But then God has a particular vocation or character that he wants us to build in our lifetime, like a certain mastery that we have to achieve. So, and we do, and then basically that mastery comes through our tools and then into what we create. And it's what we create that then goes to the souk or the bazaar.
Mm-hmm.
So it's actually an expression of the divine.
Mm-hmm.
So the pecuniary, the financial kind of trade is, if we just called it financial, it would balkanize the whole thing, because it's more than that, isn't it? It's when you create something beautiful, and it has all that symbolism and that meaning behind it, you know, a jewel box or whatever it is that you're meant to create, that's an expression of God. It's almost like you can imagine that person takes that, and then it's almost like a tabernacle for them, all these beautiful things that have got God inside them that they can take home. So so God is actually, it's manifesting through your craft, and there's beauty there, goodness and truth.
And there's there's the receptivity side of it too, because when that is an ethos and I can tell you I've been involved for a long time in inspired by Steiner's spiritual science as a foundation for social forms, where he talks about the need for villagization, not tribalization, but villagization, so that local economies are creating their own universal but individuated value system. And the idea that when somebody brings us something, a farmer brings us something at our store, and we're going to make it into food, that is a solemn responsibility to honor the work that farmer did, but also to be so appreciative of the gift that there's I want that it's non-transactional in that sense. It's here, go do that again. That was fabulous what you did with that broccoli rabe, you know, that that sacred cow.
Right.
Yeah. So it's about the receptivity too. It's about the appreciation of the gift of another person.
Yeah, that's much nicer.
And they've harnessed that essence of nature that we were talking about.
Full circle. That's
cosmos.
great. They've used the culture of agriculture to provide fruit that is living nutrition for my children. It's like, why would I not be that an unadulterated harmony with nature? Say they've cultivated something that is more than nature itself could provide.
And it's enriching our souls, our bodies, etc. And hence the trade is so vital and vitalizing.
Yeah, and sacred, I would say.
I'm going back to Jonathan talking about Cain and Abel there, and then you've got the lazy people that don't contribute anything; they just milk. How does society, how does a living organism manage such people?
Parasitic.
Yeah.
We take care of them.
Yeah.
And
We educate them.
we take care of them. And when does taking care become creating dependency?
Right. We take care of them because we've individuated to such a degree that we know what human beings are. We know what they need. So we actually care for them, not coddle them or give them palliative care, but we actually provide a culture that works reciprocally on their building their sense of responsibility through things like education and shared human perception of truth and beauty and goodness.
And
Which
the
is
virtues that
education.
Sophia was talking about as well. Virtues, resilience, these type of things that education used to teach, or try to teach at least.
That's what it was, wasn't it?
But they're a threat because they equal self-sufficiency.
Yeah.
They're an internal institution, and if we have internal institutions, we don't need external ones. So just conscious of the time. So actually, Mary only just comes on the scene now. So what we've spoken about before, she doesn't appear. So that was just Jesus talking to some random disciples. So it's only in chapter 5 that she appears. And Jesus has hoofed his way off, and the disciples are all a bit stressed and frantic, and that's when Mary comes in and consoles them and calms them down, which I think is a very divine feminine characteristic. I'm just watching Mary Magdalene on Netflix at the moment, and Joaquin Phoenix is Jesus. And he's having an existential moment, and he's lying on Mary's lap, and she's patting him, going, "It's fine. Wherever you go, I'll come with you. You won't be on your own." So, it must be true. It's on Netflix.
Is it good? Is that movie good?
I've only watched about 50 minutes of it.
Okay,
But
all right. I would assume
it's pretty good.
I just assume with Joaquin in it that it would be of a certain kind of quality because of his discernment.
Yeah, it's pretty good. Yeah, he's pretty good in it. Yeah.
Okay, seeing as you brought up TV, which I haven't watched for about a year and a half now, one of the things that I do remember seeing a couple of years back, which is related to this topic, there was a 6-part series called The Messiah? Did anybody see?
Oh, I saw some of that. Yeah.
That was really interesting. What would happen in the world if somebody, a loving, caring, Son of God type of person, tried to incarnate in our times? There was some.
Except it was is he or isn't he though? Because he studied social engineering, didn't he, at university?
Yeah,
I remember
exactly. It's the doubt around these questions is it's doubting Thomas 2.0 or something like that.
But it kind of comes to Jeff's point as well, that like with the economy, we've got so clever with the economy that even if the real key is in there, we're just so it's been so overanalyzed that we kind of don't believe that we can find anything else in there. And you can see with like social engineering and all these God mechanisms that they've been so well researched that if the real Jesus came back, Mark II, there would be someone who had a paper that went, "Oh yeah, you see what he's doing, we've analysed that," and there was some iconoclastic person who did this.
But maybe,
do you know what I mean? So the research would actually ruin the magic.
Yeah, but maybe the real Jesus would study social engineering because like the 12-year-old Jesus went to India to sit at the foot of those who are the most wise in the world in order to gain worldly knowledge, say, worldly wisdom, and so where would you go for that now? You go to the advertising industry. The greatest artists are there. The best social thinkers are there. They know how to get things done, man. So if you want to learn about how that's going to happen, you need to know how it does happen. And this is sort of the understanding as redemption, right? Is that Ahriman doesn't want to be understood. uh, Anything to deceive is the whole idea. So I mean, people who are doing social engineering and have and the degree to which that's developed and the technologies have developed to support it, that's genius. That's absolute brilliance, bordering on wisdom.
Oh, it's horrific.
It just misses the other half, which is complete naivety and innocence, untouched by any of that, just purely from the source.
Yeah. That reminds me that you say that because uh, um, Steiner gives the picture of the two Jesus children. Is that what you're referring to?
Exactly.
There's the Jesus child that never incarnated before and is absolute purity, and then there's the Jesus that had soul and etheric configurations of Zarathustra and Buddha.
Which is all the wisdom of the world.
Yes. And then the two at 12 years old, was it 12, came together at the death of the innocent one, entered the spirit, the soul of the wizened one, and then
I
off
thought
we
it was
go.
the other way around.
Might have been
Am
the
I
other
wrong?
way around. Might have been the other way around.
Yeah. Anyway.
Yeah, I'm just thinking about something really freaky. So my partner used to play guitar, or he still plays guitar, for a Hillsong church, where there'd be, like, in Australia, it's really, really big, and there could be like 2,000, 5,000 in a congregation.
Wow.
And he would talk about like how everything would go silent, and he would just play this little riff that's just echoing, and it has this particular type of reverberation, and just that everyone is just sort of almost being hypnotized by it. And he says after about 3 or 4 songs like that, everyone's brains are just totally zen and can absorb, right? And apparently this is true. Like, there's science around music, that certain beats, and you notice things, but if there's beats missing, you notice things, but if there aren't, then you don't notice things and stuff like that. So there's loads of science around it. But then also, you might have heard of MK Ultra.
Mm.
And I was reading a blog about it, and it was like things. So even in TV today, there's still programming going on, and there's things like the blue monarch butterfly, the smash mirror, which is meant to represent the smash character, your smash personality, and then certain types of music again will make you more pliant. And anyway, I was watching a show called, don't watch it, it's called Black Butterflies. It's a French one, and right at the end there was the blue monarch butterfly, there was the smashed mirror, and then there was the discordant music, all the three together. And I was like, no. We're being MK Ultra, but I couldn't, you can't say that to people because I'll be like, that's ridiculous. But like, what's the coincidence of those three happening together? But I suppose what I'm trying to say is that you've got Hillsong with this kind of thing going on that is opening people to God. Maybe not. It depends what you think of Hillsong. But then MK Ultra that's doing the same thing, but perhaps with more nefarious ends.
What you're saying there is really interesting, Sophia, because I was just listening this morning to GA 116, the Christ Impulse and the Development of Ego Consciousness. And he talks in there about how music was instrumental in being able to create the brains that would then be capable of individual thinking. But also, and there's in our last the last one we did on the philosophy of freedom, the song that I linked to in the description there is somebody. It seems my best guess so far, somebody that seems to have some type of, has had a profound experience, possibly a Christ experience, and tried to relay that in music. And so there's those two elements going on. But Steiner also talks about how that music will also be instrumental in the future, i.e. the time we live in and beyond, for helping people to reconnect with the spirit. So there's a lot of interesting points that's like could be brought in there. But GA116, I thought it was, and he was talking about Apollo and Orpheus, how Apollo was one of the bodhisattvas, and then in the next incarnation he was this Orpheus who, and his own tragic destiny, but the importance of music in there.
Boy, does that link up with the human being as musical instrument, right? And then we live in, and we also to connect that to the much of what we've been talking about, in that we live in an extraordinarily instrumentalist time, meaning we everything is instrumentalized, and so there's the instrument between us and the actual virus, right? There's always some mediating technology that we're utilizing instrumentally, and we use each other instrumentally as well. But also the idea that we can become instruments ourselves is again the thing that I think our social engineers don't want to see.
So Jonathan and I have to sort of go in the next few minutes, but perhaps what I wanted to leave you all with was just some pictures of not Mary Magdalene's in the bottom there, but we've got Mother Mary in the top, in the top two. So the first one is I think it's Mary of Mercy. So it's a sort of a typical symbology of Mary. She's holding a cloak out, and she is essentially a frame or a technology or an institution through which God's love comes, and those that are dwelling within her cloak can be imbibed with that. And then the deal is the covenant, the covenant caveat is that they then go out and share that mercy with others. So you can think of that as music or whichever. You know, we've come across quite a few frames today. So, and there's something else that I want to show you next time we catch up, which is the front page, or the title page of Thomas Hobbes's Leviathan that you might want to go and have a look at and actually see the difference between. It's kind of the same picture, but it's kind of very sinisterly not the same picture.
Mm-hmm.
One of them's technocratic, and this one is we're using instruments, and this one we're kind of musical instruments. And then the one there, the reason why I keep going like this is that the divine feminine is framing things by a question, and creating a vessel for the magic to happen, virtue, etc., etc. So that's why she's doing this, is a question of framing, which is a divine feminine thing. We have to look at how we're allowed to ask questions these days, how things are framed, etc., and how that's abused. And then essentially you've got through her heart the Logos. So she's actually giving birth to the Logos. So her creation has what's beyond flowing through her. So again, that trope of our creations carry something divine through, potentially, but may not do either, like Frankenstein. But so I just wanted to leave those symbols of Mary with you to have a sort of a think about. with those ideas of technology and framing and mediating and those sorts of mediatrix. Apparently Mary is called a mediatrix. She's a stand-in for the church and all these other things. So she's actually the internal institutionalization of something, posing a question. So yeah, I just thought that might be a good place for us to stop today, if that's okay.
Yeah, that's a
Thanks,
beautiful
Sophia.
gift. What a lovely way to send us out.
So nice to be part of this experience, this conversation. Yeah.
My goodness.
It's special.
Yeah. I like the tree growing out of the rock too.
I'll press with end. Okay.